All right, Anthony. Anthony, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Originally, I was born in East New York, Brooklyn, and when I was about 5 years old, we moved across the Conduit Boulevard into Ozone Park, Queens. So I basically really grew up in Ozone Park.
And your father was?
My father was Anthony Fat Andy Ruggiano. He was a made member of the Gambino family, but originally when he became a made member, it was called the Mangano family. It was before Carlo Gambino took over as the boss. Albert Anastasia was the boss.
You remember those years?
No, well, what happened was my father was 26 years old, and in 1953 he became a made member, the year I was born. He used to always say that was the best year of his life because he became a made member of the mafia and he became a father. And I grew up to say, yeah, lucky me, like, why couldn't he be like a barber or a butcher, like, you know? Yeah, so I was actually born into that life because he became a made member the same year I was born, but it wasn't the Gambino family then, it was the Mangano family.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember of your childhood and that part of your dad's life?
You know, when I was a kid, I always knew something was different, you know, but I didn't know what. So and I knew it was different when I used to go by my friends' houses and even my own cousins and my own uncles. Like I knew something was different about my father than other men. Like he wasn't home every night. He would eat, like he stood home on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Like he had certain nights he was home and the other nights he was out, and he was always dressed up in a suit and tie. I really didn't know what he did for a living. And, when I used to go out with him, like we would go to Sunday dinner to a restaurant, I always knew that when he walked in a room, the atmosphere changed, but I didn't know why. But I always knew like people catered to him, and the owner would always come and sit with us, and we would always stay in the restaurant longer than other people. And he always owned bars. My father, he had this guy Pacey who had a liquor license, was his partner, and they always had bars. And he always used to name his bars after Louis Prima songs because he was good friends with Louis Prima. So he had this bar called the Black Magic, which was one of Louis' songs, that old Black Magic. And I would go there with him on Saturdays, and when I walked in, people would stick money in my pocket, and I had the run of the bar. So like I said, I always knew there was something different, but I didn't know what. Even when I went to school, you know, when you're a kid, the teacher asks you, you know, what does your father do for a living? You have that one class where everybody has to get up to say, my father's a fireman, my father is a sanitation worker. So I went home and I didn't know what he did, and I said, Dad, tomorrow the project is what your father does for a living. I must have been about 8 or 9, and he said, I work in the dry cleaners. Now, I knew that wasn't true. Even though I was a little kid, I knew that wasn't, not that I knew that's not what he did, but I didn't know what he did. But I rolled with it. You know, I went to school the next day and I said, my father works in the dry cleaners. And the reason why he told me that, which I found out later on, was because he had a guy around him that owned dry cleaners, and he was on the books there for his income tax. He was like a no-show job. The guy owned like 5 dry cleaners. So like I rolled with that, and I didn't know why he was special, but I just knew he was special, and I sort of liked the feeling. You know, I grew to like it. And then when I was about, I would say 13, so in New York back then, you stood on your block. Like the neighborhood, everybody knew each other, but you stood on your block. And then when you became like 12 or 13, you would drift off the block into the neighborhood, you know? And that's what I did. So when I was around 12 or 13, I drifted off my block to this pizzeria that was on 101st Avenue. And when I went there and I started going there, the older guys would see me, and I would hear them say, that's Fat Andy's son, that's Fat Andy's son, and they would point me out. And that's how I learned about that he was mobbed up. That's when I started learning about who he was from the older kids in the neighborhood. And what my father did was, because in Ozone Park, all these wise guys had clubs. Like the Genovese family had a club, the Banana family had a club, and the Gambino family had a club where John Gotti hung out, which was called the Bergen Hunt Fish Club, that this guy Charlie Wagons had. Charlie Wagons was the same guy that proposed my father to become a made member, and later on actually proposed John Gotti to become a member. So I already knew Charlie, but I didn't know John Gotti. But my father took me to these clubs to introduce me to them, because now I'm running around the neighborhood. He didn't want me to get hurt, or if I did something wrong, he didn't want them to hurt me, or he wanted them to look out for me. So he started bringing me to these clubs, introducing me to these wise guys in Ozone Park. This is my son. He would bring me to this club. He would bring me to Ciro's Perone Club. He was a Genovese guy. This guy, Vinny Asara, he was a Bonanno guy, and I started meeting all these guys. And, you know, back then, the whole city was mobbed up. New York's, like every neighborhood, there was mob guys in every neighborhood, every borough.
What year was this, roughly?
This was in the 60s. This was in 60, let's see, I was 66, 65, 66. And that's how I started to learn about my father and about the mob. And then it's funny because when I found out he was a criminal, like, and I started getting this attention, I liked it. I liked the feeling. It was like a drug. Like I started getting treated special because I was Fat Andy's son. And I hooked up with these kids, and then I started like acting out, I guess, I don't know, playing hooky from school. You know, I started smoking weed, you know, it was the 60s, you know, and I started getting in trouble. And, you know, then, I don't know, then when I was 16, like, now I found out he was a wise guy. I started learning about the structure of the mob. You know, there was always wise guys in my house from when I was a little kid. You know, all his friends would come over and hang out and eat dinner. His partner, Tony Lee, was my godfather. He was a wise guy. He was always around. And then when I was 16, I got kicked out of school. I got suspended. I was a truant. And I got suspended from school, and he stopped talking to me. He wouldn't talk to me. He didn't, because he really didn't want me in the street. And I called up my uncle, and I had this like sit down in my house with him and my uncle. And my uncle said, "Listen, he's not going to go back to school. You got to put him to work." And my father said, "You want to go to work?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "All right, I'll get you in the bricklayers union," because you know the mob had all the unions. And I said, "I don't want to be no fucking bricklayer." He goes, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to work for you." You know, and he sort of looked at me, and he didn't say nothing. And then he leaned forward on the table, and he tapped the table, and he said, "If you want to work for me, remember one thing, going to jail is all part of the job." He told me. And now here I am, I'm 16, and I'm okay with that. Like, you know, like.
I used to look on the internet and search my name in a Google search, and I would find so much information that was just it was horrifying. You'd see my address, you'd see phone numbers, you'd see my relatives, you'd see all my health information, all kinds of stuff. It's like, I don't want that information out there. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. And that's why I signed up for Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows you which data brokers are selling your information and automatically submits opt-out requests for you. Cleaning up my information not only reduces the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from the hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft, insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one or two of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking your front door and leaving your back door wide open. I'm too busy to deal with this stuff, and that's why I appreciate that Aura is always on, keeping me safe so I don't have to worry about this kind of stuff. I value my privacy, and if you value yours, you can go to aura.com/softwhiteunderbelly to start your 2-week free trial. The link is in the video description box below. Now back to the video. Thanks.
You know, I said, all right, you know, and the next day, he took me to this club, this guy, Philly the Pimp owned. That was the guy's nickname. I don't know if he was a pimp or not, but that was his nickname, Philly the Pimp. And he had a blackjack game, because everything was illegal back then. There was no casinos. And he had a blackjack game, and that was my first illegal job, working in this blackjack game. Yeah. So, and that was the beginning, and then I went to work in a blackjack game, and then I went to work in a dice game, and then I started writing numbers, and like I was in the minor leagues, you sort of say. But now I'm going around with my father. He's a big wise guy. He had a big crew with him. He was making, you know, good money.
How was he making money?
Oh, they were hijacking trucks. They had a big sports business. They had crap games. I mean, they were doing, you know, he had a big number business. They owned bars. They had after-hour clubs. I mean, he had about 70 guys with him, you know. So they were just bringing money in like crazy. And I got involved in all of it, all the schemes, all the, selling untaxed cigarettes, porn, selling 8mm porn. We had, remember the old 8mm tapes? Because his friend DB was a big porn guy. Then he started taking me to Manhattan to the Ravenite, and I just started getting lost. I got lost in that world because I'm Fat Andy's son. I got card. The city's opening up. I'm going to the Copacabana, just like in Goodfellas, through the basement, up through the kitchen.
So what comes with that life?
Without a doubt,
you
don't wait online.
Women,
the best tables in the restaurants. You don't wait for nothing. Front row seats. Celebrities are in my house. Frankie Valli's in my house. Jay Black, Louis Prima. My father's going out. Oh yeah, I was with Frank Sinatra last night at Jilly's. And I'm loving it. But and then I put together a little crew, and I started getting arrested. Matter of fact, we were talking about Mike Dowd. That precinct, the 75th precinct, was our precinct in East New York. That precinct was the first precinct to arrest me, Mike Dowd's precinct. And but there was a lot of corruption then too. All the cops were on the take, so I would get arrested, and he would pay off the cops, and I would get let go, and and it was a good time. And then I got arrested. I got arrested on a big case. I got arrested on the first time. Then I went to work, and he had a big number business, which is the lottery. When I was in my early 20s, and our office was in Mulberry Street in Manhattan, and I got arrested there. That was in 1974, and I got arrested on Mulberry Street, and that was the first time my name was ever in the newspaper. So they had an article in the newspaper about, my father and me, about the numbers, and I was arrested, and I got like celebrity status behind that, and then I went out that Friday night, and I walked into this disco, and oh my God, we didn't know, and it was just, I felt special. And I thought we were right. I thought our society, what he was teaching me was right and society was wrong. And then he started telling me about violence, acts of violence that he committed, because now I'm in my early 20s, and he's schooling me, this guy's that, this guy did a piece of work. And in the mob, work means murder. When he says, and my father would tell me, he's a good guy. That means he committed a murder, a hit for the mob, or he did work. That means he did. And my father would start telling me about things he did, murders he committed.
So he was honest with you about everything.
Oh, he was honest. Yeah, once I committed, he knew I was committed. He was honest about everything. Like he told me, he was very honest. And I got arrested on we hijacked this liquor warehouse, and I got arrested, and I went to prison. It's funny because now I had to turn myself in 1978. And so we were hanging out. We used to go to the Ravenite, which was our Neil Delacroce's club. He was the underboss of the Gambino family. Later on, John Gotti inherited the Ravenite. It became really famous. And the 2 days before I had to surrender myself, we had a going away party there for me. Now, here I am. I'm 23 years old. I just got sentenced to 5 years. I'm going to a penitentiary. And they have this big going away party for me, like I was going to Harvard. Like I go into this club, and everybody's suits and hey, hugging me, kissing me, telling me, oh, don't worry. You go there, you tell them you're with us, and they're schooling me about going away. And it was like this big festive party. Meanwhile, I'm going to jail, And then that was the first time I went to jail, and that was in '78. I got out in '80, the end of '80, and I went right back to the street. My father now was going back and forth to Florida, and we opened up a restaurant in Florida, and now I'm starting to fool around with cocaine. Everybody's blowing coke. It's the disco era, Studio 54. I'm going to the Ritz. I'm hanging out with all these celebrities at the Ritz, Andy Warhol, David Bowie. I mean, we had to run the whole place. For some reason, people loved hanging out with mob guys. I mean, so especially celebrities, they just loved hanging out with us. Like Diana Ross sat at my table one night with Gene Simmons. I mean, that's how crazy it was. It just was a crazy time. And I had just got out of jail. And we started going back and forth to Florida. He started making money in Florida. And then somebody brought some undercover FBI agents to my father, and he started shylocking them. But he had a lot of power. He was a very powerful soldier, captain in the Gambino family, and he had a lot of guys with him, like I said. But he got jammed up, and he got arrested for a RICO. and he wound up getting 40 years. He wound up getting 40 years. He did 13. He wound up getting. Now I was getting arrested, and like I said, so now I'm dibbling dabbling in drugs. But I never had a legitimate job. All he taught me was about crime, how to be a bookmaker, how to be a Shylock, how to write numbers. He didn't teach me how to fix anything or build anything, because he truly believed in that life. Like he believed in it, like wholeheartedly. Like he used to tell me the government is the real mafia. They wrote the book on treachery. Don't feel sorry for the public. They deserve everything they get. Because they vote for these people, and because there was a lot of corruption in his day back when he was a kid in the 40s and 50s, with the politicians and all that shit. So for a couple of years, I started messing around with the coke, and in the interim, John Gotti now we have a good relationship with John Gotti, because going back from when I'm 13, I met the man, and he always liked us. He was very close to my father, and he becomes the boss. They kill Paul Castellano, him and Sammy the Bull, another friend of mine, Sammy the Bull. They kill Paul Castellano. My father was in jail. We tell him the whole story. And in 1988, I went into treatment. Today, matter of fact, today, January 12th, I'm clean 35 years today.
Oh, good for
Today's my sobriety date, or my clean date today. Now John Gotti's the boss. My father's in jail. And like I said, I'm a criminal now since I'm 16. That's all I knew. So I get clean, I get out of treatment, and I go see John Gotti, and because he's the boss. And I lived in Ozone Park, and he was in Ozone Park. That was his headquarters. And he was close to my father. He was close with Tony Lee, my father's partner. So I go see him. I get out of treatment on a Wednesday, and I go see him on Saturday. And he takes me outside his club, and he says to me, you got a beat. For some reason, even though they knew I had an issue with cocaine, they never chased me or they didn't abuse me. I guess it had a lot to do because I was Fatty Andy's son. But I think he really liked me, and he liked my family. And I said, well, I don't have a car. And he went inside. He made a phone call. And he told me, go to this car lot on 84th Street and ask for this guy Anthony and tell him he sent me. So I go to this car lot and I walk in, and this guy said, you Anthony? He goes, yeah. I said, John sent me. He says, take whatever car you want. So now I'm looking for a Cadillac, right? Fucking, I'm looking around, but he didn't have no Cadillac. So he had a beautiful white Bonneville, 4-door white Bonneville. Bonnevilles were big back then. In 88, 89. So I took the Bonneville, I showed him the car. He loaned me some, he gave me a couple of $1,000 for my pocket. And he told me, come back every week with $100. And I went 1 week and 2 weeks. Then the third week, he asked me, how much you owe me? I said, another $1,700. He said, keep it as a gift. And then I got clean, and then I started getting my rep back. I started more, my father was in jail, so now I got more involved, taking care of his business partners with Tony Lee. And I started making a lot of money illegally, but everything I did was illegal. Like my day involved, I had like chop shops. We were stealing cars, chopping them up. I had a credit card ring going. I had a vending company. I extorted a vending company, all gambling machines. I extorted it from this guy, Stevie. Just money was rolling in, all illegal. And then it's funny because people talk about with John Gotti. He really never had he was the boss, but I never committed a crime with him outside. Well, I did later on, which I'll get to. Because when I came out of jail in 88, I have to back up a minute, because when I came out of treatment in 88, my brother-in-law had beat up my mother. And we got permission to kill him, my brother-in-law. And my father okayed it. And that's the mafia, so I went up to see my father was in prison, and I told him that we wanted to kill Frankie, and he gave me permission to commit a murder. So now here's a father and son, and the father gave the son permission to go commit a murder, thinking that that's okay. And then he went to go to sleep, and I went home, and I went to sleep like it was like a regular conversation. Yeah, oh yeah, go kill him. Don't worry. Yeah, that's all right. Just be careful. And then John Gotti okayed it because we had to get permission. Because in the mafia, you can't just randomly kill people. You have to get permission. It's like protocol. You have to bring it up the ladder to the boss, and the boss has to okay it because murder, violence brings heat around. So we got permission to unfortunately to kill my brother-in-law, and a couple of months later we actually did that. And I picked him up. I drove him to Cafe Liberty, and I walked him in, and when I walked him in, he was shot and he was killed. And then they took him and they threw him out in the Atlantic Ocean. They took him on a boat and they put him in the ocean. And, I was okay with it back then. Now sitting here now, I wish I could go back and not do it. It was a horrendous thing I did to my sister and my niece. But back then, it didn't even faze me, because he knew better. He was in the mob. He knew better. And so that I committed a murder. Now I'm making a lot of money. Everything's illegal. I wasn't doing anything legit. And my father was loving it. He was proud of me. I'm meeting with the boss of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Joe Molino. I'm hanging out with Nicky Carrazza. He's a captain. And then in '89, I get arrested again. And this is funny because now I get arrested in '89 for policy, for numbers. We had a $90,000 a day business. We weren't making $90,000, but that's what we were bringing in. And I get arrested in the street with a whole bunch of guys, and the front page of the news is $14 million a year, John Gotti bookmaking ring busted. John had nothing to do with it. He was the boss, but he had nothing to do with it. It was ours. And I get out on bail, and I see him, and he's breaking my balls and going, "Hey, we made $14 million this year. Where's my end? I didn't get 10 cents. I said, "Oh, you want to break balls?" I said, "I'm going to go to jail for this shit." He was breaking our balls because he didn't get no money out of it. He had nothing to do with it. But the point I'm trying to make is now this guy's bigger than life. He's all over the newspapers. I mean, Andy Warhol got him on Time magazine, and it's a lot of heat. And anybody that was around him, they were going after. So everything was, no matter who you were, you got arrested. His name was part of it. So I got arrested in '89. My father was in jail doing his 40 years. I got arrested in '89, and I got out on bail, and then I got rearrested again in March of '90 for ongoing criminal enterprise by the state. That was my first RICO charge, and I ended up taking a plea, and I got a 1 1/3 to 4. And I wound up doing 16 months. And I'm in there now. My son's 8 years old, and now, when are you coming home? When are you coming home? When are you coming home? It was different than when I was a kid. When I went to jail in the '70s, I had no children. It didn't faze me. I did a good bid, as they say. Now I'm in my 30s, my late 30s, and my son's 8. And when are you coming home? When are you coming home? But I had no skills. So when I got out in '92, I had no skills. I didn't know how to do anything but commit crimes. So I went right back to the street. John had gotten arrested when I was away. Sammy the Bull started cooperating. John got convicted. He was off the street. And my father, this guy, Nicky Carrazza, who my father proposed to become a made member, now was on. So now when John Gotti went to jail, a panel took over the Gambino family. It was a 3-member panel. It was John's son, John Jr., his brother, Pete Gotti, and this guy, Nicky Carrazza, who was a prodigy of my father, Fat Andy and Tony Lee. So I was very close with him. So now I had an in to the panel, to the hierarchy of the Gambino family, even though now John was out of the picture. So I got out in '92, and I just went right back to the street, and I started making crazy big money. But I'm clean, and I'm sort of in a 12-step program at the time, and I'm sort of working on myself, and I don't know, I guess some kind of spiritual, I went on some kind of, not a religious thing, but I started getting a little uncomfortable with my lifestyle. I started getting a little uncomfortable with my lifestyle, and I got remarried, and I had a daughter. I had a little girl, a daughter that I named Tony Lee after my father's partner because he had passed away. But I couldn't get out, but I'm uncomfortable. I'm making a lot of money, and I'm remarried. My father's in prison. John Gotti died. Tony Lee, my father's partner, died. And then in 1995, 5 o'clock in the morning, which is not a good time when your bell rings in the mob. You know, usually if you're in the mob and your bell rings at 5 o'clock, you're getting arrested, you know. And I hear my bell ringing and I look up at the clock and it's 5:02 and I go, oh, fuck. And so I tell my wife, go look out the window. So she goes over to the window. She looks, she goes, oh my God, the whole street's lit up. There's people running all over. And I go look downstairs by the front door and there's all cops outside my door. And they came in and they had a search warrant and all that shit. And my poor little daughter's running around with her diapers going, Daddy, are these your friends? Daddy, are these your friends? You know, and but that's the mob, you know, even though after the mob is like so we killed my brother-in-law and then my sister started dating another guy and my sister got arrested because the kid was a kid from the neighborhood. He stole a car and he had a credit card and they got arrested. And so I go visit my father to tell him what happened. And my father looks at me, he goes, you know what you got to do here, right? With this kid? I go, what are you, crazy? I said, I'm not going to kill this kid. I said, yeah, we'll kill everybody she goes with until she goes with a brain surgeon. I said, I'm not going to kill this kid. He wasn't mobbed up. Frankie knew the deal. This kid was a kid from the neighborhood. He didn't know a wise guy from a hole in the wall, this kid, Chris. So when I got back to the neighborhood, I told the kid, listen, you got to get the fuck out of here because you're going to go. And he left the neighborhood, and I didn't know what happened to him. And I didn't want to ask my father what happened to him because I didn't see this kid for like 2 years. And then about 2 years later, I get a letter from a friend of mine that was in prison in upstate New York. And he said, listen, there's a kid named Chris in the yard going around telling everybody he comes from Ozone Park and he dated your sister. And I said, oh, thank God, this kid's alive. You know, and I wrote him back, oh, yeah, he's all right. Look out for him. He used to date my sister. And but that's the mob. Like, so my father asked me to kill somebody. And I told him no, and he got mad at me, you know. And so in 1995, I'm still mobbed up, and the bell rings, they come in, and my daughter's in her diapers, and she's going, Daddy, are these your friends? You know, and I'm sitting on the couch, I'm in handcuffed, and I'm going like, what the fuck? You know, like, so I got arrested on a big bookmaking case, which is now legal, you know, sports betting. You know, I have an app on my phone. If I want to bet the games tomorrow, you know, I could do that because the government's getting their end. So I got arrested on this big bookmaking roundup, and out of like 20 people that got arrested, only 4 of us went to jail. And I was one of the 4 because I'm Fat Andy's son and close to John Gotti. So I took a plea. I got a 2-4. So now at the time I was waiting to become a made member, but now I got arrested and I got proposed, but now I got this case. So I get a 2-4. And I turn myself in, I go away. While I'm in prison, I get indicted by the feds in Florida on a RICO case. Now, this is my 3rd RICO case. I get indicted in Florida on a RICO case while I'm in prison doing the bookmaking sentence. They take me down to Florida. I take another plea and I get 10 years. And I thank the judge that I only got 10 years because he could have because now my criminal history was horrible. I was in the last category. I was in category 6 of the new sentencing guidelines. And he gave me in the middle. He gave me 10 years. He could have gave me 20, but he gave me 10. And, you know, I wound up doing 8 years and 3 months. But what happened was, while I was in prison, that time I said to myself, what am I doing? You know, what am I doing? I'm back in jail again. And in 1999, my father got out in 97 while I was incarcerated, and he comes to visit me in Elmira. I was in Elmira State Prison. He comes to visit me. And he's my brother, and he tells me, I'm opening up, I'm going partners with these guys in Philadelphia. We're opening up a fruit and vegetable exchange. I said, fruit and vegetables? What are we going to do? What do we know about fruits and vegetables? He goes, no, I'm opening it up for you when you come home because our life is all over. It's all over. I said, what are you talking about? He goes, we had 2 things going for us. Everybody feared us and nobody cooperated. He goes, and nobody fears us no more and people are cooperating. And this RICO statue, he goes, it's over for us. So we're going to open up a fruit and vegetable exchange. We're going to build it up and that's going to be ours. And he left. That was in 98. He came to see me. To make a long story short, in 99, he winds up getting sick. He died. Now I'm in prison. He died. After he dies, the mob was it was a different mob. Then in the 70s, the people out there were different. They took everything. They took all our businesses, because anything illegal they took. They stopped giving my mother money. They just didn't do right by us. So I wound up doing 8 years and 3 months. And, I got out in 2004, and I got my first legitimate job. But I still had one foot in at organized, I couldn't get out totally. So when I got out, a wise guy came to see me, and I got transferred to Nicky Carrazza's crew. They transferred me from one crew to Nicky Carrazza's crew, and Nicky Carrazza, what they call, proposed me to be made. Which is when they propose you, they write your name literally on a piece of paper, and they send it around to the 5 families, and all the captains look at the name, and if anybody has anything derogatory to say about you, they bring it forward to stop you from getting made. So my name was being passed around. So, and I was not afraid to say I didn't want it, but I was like, the devil was on one shoulder and the angel was on the other shoulder, whispering in my ear. So, but I had my first legitimate job. I was driving a truck, and I loved it. I would drive this truck every day to Manhattan. And, it's funny because how I got the job, the guy calls me up and says, listen, do you know your way around Manhattan? I said, of course I know my way around. I was in Manhattan every day. He goes, you know how to drive a truck? I never drove a truck in my life. I go, yeah, I know how to drive a truck. I never fucking drove a truck. So he says to me, all right, come and meet this guy that owned Island Acoustics. So I go meet the guy that owned. He goes, you know your way around Manhattan? I go, yeah, of course I do. He says, all right, come tomorrow morning. The truck, 5 o'clock in the morning, the truck will be parked. It's going to be, the invoices will be on the front seat with the addresses. From the back to the front, it was gang boxes for construction jobs. A gang box is a metal box with all hammers and nails and all kinds of stuff in it. They call it a gang box for the construction site. I said, all right. I go the next morning. I get the key. I make the sign of the cross. I started up the truck, and I drove the truck to Manhattan, and I loved it. And I said, I should have done this 30 years ago. What a jerk off I was that I thought, I thought guys that did this for a living were jerk offs, but then I realized that I was the jerk off. But I still couldn't get out of that life. Like I still was struggling with that lifestyle. My father's dead, Tony's dead, John Gotti died before I got out of jail. So all my mentors were gone. So I was doing good. I'm waiting to get straightened out. They sent for me. We have this big sit down. And they tell me which SWAT, because when you're getting proposed to be made, they tell you like who's who, who's a captain, who's a soldier, and they give you the rundown of the family of who's who and everything. So I had this meeting, and they give me this in this restaurant called Alberto's on Metropolitan Avenue, and I have this power, and they tell me everything, they school me with everything, and I'm driving the truck, and I'm sitting one day in front of my son's house on a bench. Because I'm waiting for my son to come home. We had to go to a wedding that night. And I'm sitting, it's 05, and I'm sitting in front of my son's house because I had a meeting, to back up, I had a meeting a week before this day. I had a meeting with this guy, Lenny DiMaria, who was a captain in the Gambino family. So now the structure of the family is there's a boss, an underboss, a consigliere, captain, soldiers, associates. That's how it goes. So now I have a meeting with this Captain Lenny DiMaria, and he tells me at this meeting, listen, your name went around, everything's approved. You don't need anybody to represent you no more. You could go on sit downs. Everybody knows you're going to be respected like a wise guy. You're fine. The only thing is we haven't had the ceremony yet, which, pricking the finger and all that. He goes, we're going to have the ceremony in a couple of weeks, but you're okay to do, you have permission to sit down for yourself and represent yourself. I said, all right, thanks. A week later, I'm sitting on this bench. The sun's out. I'm sitting on this bench in Howard Beach, Queens, in my son's house. I'm sitting there like this. The sun's hitting me. It's June. It's in the beginning of June, and all of a sudden I hear, don't move, motherfucker. And I open up my eyes, and there's a gun right in my fucking nose like this. And I look, and all of a sudden, from behind, I get grabbed, and I get lifted up and handcuffed. And they drag me out of the courtyard and they throw me in a van and they're screaming at me, "You fucking murderer! We got you now! You fucking murderer!" And they're screaming at me, "You're a murderer! You're a murderer!" And it was FBI agents. They arrested me for the murder of my brother-in-law. I got indicted for another RICO. So then they take me to the Brooklyn, the MDC in Brooklyn, the federal prison in Brooklyn. And, and this FBI agent, Jerry Conrad, gave me his card. And I never kept these cards. Like, throughout the years, I would throw them out because cooperating was never even a thought in my mind. Like, it just wasn't a thought in my mind. And I would never disrespect my father like that. But for some reason, I don't know if it was divine intervention or something, for some reason, I kept this guy's card. Now, you got to remember, now I'm clean. A lot of years, I'm working on myself. I'm in a 12-step program. And like I said earlier, I started to develop a conscience in spite of myself, which I never had a conscience. The mob people are very self-centered people, egomaniacs, self-centered, what's the word I'm looking for? Narcissistic, very narcissistic, and I fit all the boxes. An FBI agent told me I was not a psychopath, something else. But anyway, I looked it up and he was right. I fit all the categories. A sociopath. He told me I was a sociopath. And I didn't know what he meant. I go, "What are you talking?" And then I Googled and I go, "Damn, he's right. I was. We all were, So I get locked up for this RICO, for this murder, and he gives me this card, and I kept the card. And I don't, which I never did, but I kept his card. And I got out on bail. I got out on bail a couple of weeks later on a $3 million secured bond. My father-in-law put up his company. My mother had to put up her house. My friend Donna put up her house. My cousin Ricky put up his house. We had to come up with $3 million in assets. So we did. They put it together. I got out on bail. I'm on home confinement. I got the monitor on my leg. I can't leave my house. I lost my job. My wife was the only one working and nobody was helping me. Like the mob, they weren't looking out for me. It was a different world. Like when my father's day, when you went to jail, they looked out for you. Nobody was looking out for me. I had no money to pay for a lawyer. Now here's guys I committed a murder with and they're not even helping me. It was sort of like with the drugs. I sort of was hitting the bottom with the lifestyle. Like when I got clean from the coke, from the drugs, like I woke up one day and I was done. Like I looked in the mirror and like I don't know who was looking back at me. I was 140 pounds. I was 35 years old. I was 140 pounds. I was in a lot of pain and I hit a bottom and I got clean. And that's sort of what happened with that lifestyle. I hit a bottom and like I just didn't want to do it anymore, but I couldn't make the phone call. I would get the card out and I would pick up the phone and I would see my father's face and I'd hang the phone up and the next day I'd do the same thing. And I kept on doing that. I'd pick up the phone to call the FBI and I would get nervous and I would hang it up. And this went on for like almost a year. I just couldn't do it. I would stay up at night and I was just stressed out. And so I meet this guy in my neighborhood, a knockaround guy in my neighborhood that really took his life in his hands because he didn't know how I was thinking. Because, when you cooperate, it's a death sentence. You're supposed to, that's a lifelong contract to kill you. Like, that's the cardinal rule. You don't you don't cooperate. And my father hated cooperators. So I went by this guy's house, and I could see what's going on out. My co-defendants, that things aren't looking good for me, but they're looking good for them. Like, they're sort of like, I had a feeling they were looking to throw me under the bus. Because I was the last person with my brother-in-law. Like, I picked him up and drove him somewhere, and he disappeared. But we had a scenario set up for them, for people to we had a bullshit story to tell people, but I knew, he was gone. So I met this kid in his house, and he told me, "Why don't you call the government?" I go, "How the fuck could you tell me that? Are you crazy telling me something like that?" He goes, "Well, what do I don't know what you want to do." I go, "I can't disrespect my father like that." And he goes, "Your father's dead." He goes, "You did everything for your father. You committed a murder with your father. Whatever your father asked you to do, you did. He's gone." And I still couldn't do it. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. Even sitting here now, sometimes I don't even believe I did it. Like a couple of weeks went by after that, and then I had some legal stuff going on, and I hired this lawyer, this mob lawyer, to try to help me, and they were looking into it, and I got a call from them one day, and they told me, listen, and now this is another thing. This guy was good friends with us. They could have lost their practice because mob lawyers don't represent people that cooperate. It's like you don't do that. So this lawyer told me, listen, I've been looking into your case. Your co-defendants lawyers don't want to help you. I think they're going to throw you under the bus for this murder. He says, I think you need to call the government. I said, are you kidding me? They said no. They said, listen, save yourself. You need to call the government. This life is over. Get out of the life. I hung up the phone. I went to bed that night. I woke up the next day. Couldn't do it. I took the card, the FBI agent's card. I took the card. I gave it to my wife. She was driving to Ridgewood and to Queens to go to work from Comac, Long Island. I gave her the card, and I said, take this card, and when you get to work, call this number and tell this guy to come see me. And she did. She went to work. She called. It was the hardest decision I ever made. She went to work. She called up the agent, Jerry Conrad, who had just recently passed away. And they came to my house and see me, and I cooperated. And they took me out of my house. I pleaded guilty to the murder. I started proffering. They moved me around the country, and I testified. I wind up testifying at 6 trials. It was rough. It was rough, very rough. Even to this day, sometimes, like I have good days and bad days. I testified at 6 trials, a lot of murders. I knew a lot. I was in the street for so many years, and I knew so much shit. My story is so big, but I just and I testified at a couple of murder trials. People got convicted. And then I was living in Michigan. I hated it. I was living in Michigan. And I got a call one day from somebody that was running a treatment center that I knew from New York, that I stood in contact with. And he was a program director of a drug treatment center in Florida. And he calls me up one day and he says to me, listen, you want a job? I says, a job? I said, job doing what? He goes, as a counselor. I said, a counselor? What do I know about being a counselor, right? Now I'm not working because the government now is paying all my bills because I'm still testifying. So that I had a stipend. They're paying my bills and everything. And he goes, yeah, listen. He goes, listen, I spoke to the owner of the treatment center. I told him most of your story, not everything, because now I'm living under assumed name. My name's not Anthony no more. It's something else. My last name's not Ruggiano no more. It's something else. He goes, I told the owner about you, and we think because of your life experience, you would be a good counselor, but you got to go back to school to get certified. I said, come on, I don't want to go back to school. He said, think about it. Now I'm 60 years old when this is happening. I'm not a kid no more. I'm 60 years old. So I thought about it. I talked about it with my daughter. She was in Michigan State. She was at Ware College in Michigan State University. I talked to her. And I decided to do it. So I packed up. I got my cat Mikey, and we got in my car, and I drove to Florida, and I became a counselor. I became a counselor. The FBI didn't want me to leave at first. They were afraid of my safety. And they were giving me a little bit of a hard time, but I told them, I said, listen, when this is over and you stop giving me money, what am I supposed to do? I have no skills. I don't know how to do anything. I have no Social Security. I have no 401ks. I don't have shit. I never even paid taxes in my whole life. I have nothing. What do I do? This is an opportunity for me. Like my life experience is my education, is my diploma, So they said, okay. And I went back to school, and I became a counselor in a treatment center. And it was great, like here I am. I'm helping people because now I'm in recovery myself on my own. And now I'm helping people and I'm getting paid. And what happened was, which I still do today. Now I don't work in a treatment center anymore. I work now in a detox. I work 3 12-hour shifts a week in a detox. I'm a technician now. But what happened was, after all that stuff, all that life, the violence and the drugs and the crime, I was never content. It was always about more. My motto was more. The next one, if I had a blonde, I wanted a redhead. If I had a yellow Cadillac, I wanted a black Cadillac. If I had 5,000, I wanted 10,000. I was never content. While I'm doing one scheme, I'm thinking of another scheme. Never content. Now here I am. I become a counselor. The money's not like it was in the mob, but all my needs are being met. I'm meeting my bills. I had a nice car. I was healthy. My family was healthy. And I sat on my couch one day and I realized that I finally became content. And when people ask me today, like, what's the difference between then and now? I'm content. I understand now I don't need to wear $1,000 suits to feel good about myself. I don't need to go out with models. I don't need to have $1,000 in my pocket. When I got out of prison in 2004, the internet exploded. I didn't know nothing. I still don't know shit about I'm computer illiterate. I was born in the 50s. What the fuck do I know about computers? I had an Erector set. When I got out of jail in 2004, my daughter was 11. She says, you got to get an email. Why I got to get an email? You got to get an email, she told me. So I get an email. Then she tells me I got to get a username. I don't know what she was talking. I go, what username? What are you talking about? So she explains to me what a username is. So I'm thinking about a username, and my username was, I picked Inside Out 89. And the reason why I picked Inside Out 89, because now I'm 60 years old, and I finally realized that happiness is an inside-out job. Nothing out here, because I had everything. I had everything. I had money. I had respect. I was like a prince. Like we were princes of the people. Used to tell me that we were like the Kennedys. The mob ran the show, and I had everything, and I was never happy. It was instant gratification. All that glitter. My therapist used to tell me, all that glitters isn't gold. And so I picked Inside Out 89 because I finally realized that it was an inside-out job, and I got clean in 89. That's why today I'm clean for 35 years. Because in January 12th, 1989, I haven't had a drink, a drug, a joint, nothing in 35 years. I wish I could have a glass of wine, but that's another story for another day. But so my username was Inside Out 89. And that's what it took. It took all that time and all that misery and all that to become content. And that's what I am.
It's a crazy story.
Crazy. And there's a lot more. I left, I gave you the short version.
For next time.
You know what I mean?
Next time.
Yeah, I gave you the short version.
You saw the mob go from being what it, in its heyday, you saw it deteriorate.
Big time. Yeah. When I was a kid, when I first got started, it was completely, even like once my father's generation started deteriorating, like started getting out of the picture, it was different.
What was it that took it down? Greed,
drugs, people cooperating. Before I got locked up for murder because people cooperated against me. I got indicted in Miami because people cooperated against me. Yeah, it was a number of things, but yeah. And some people, even though you're in the mob, doesn't mean you're going to make money because you're in the mob. You got to still have some kind of intelligence to earn money. Some wise guys were dumb as rocks. They didn't know how to earn money. The only way they made money was to take it from guys that knew how to make money. So these are the guys now that became captains and soldiers, So when my father went to jail, they took everything. Like they took whatever my father's illegal income was, the captains, Pete Gotti, they took it. And I was left with the scraps. But I knew how to earn money. So the clientele of the hierarchy wasn't the same as in my father's day. Like John Gotti would have never done that. Like if John Gotti was alive, they would have never done that to my family because he would have looked out for us. And if my father didn't die, none of that would have ever happened. If my father didn't die in 1999, my life would be totally different today. I may have done life because I cooperated, but if my father was alive, I would have never cooperated because I would have never gave my father up. I mean, to this day, he haunts me. Like, I was telling somebody today, like, I have my family in New York, we have 3 plots in 2 different cemeteries. So I have all the deeds because I'm the oldest grandchild, and I have all the deeds. So I have my father, where my father's buried in one plot. His parents, my grandparents, and my uncles and aunts are buried in another plot in the same cemetery. And then my mother's family is buried in another cemetery, and I have that. So I have access to 3 plots. I know my father's mad at me. I mean, this might sound crazy to like normal people, but I know he's mad at me. If there's an afterlife, he's mad at me because I cooperated. You know, some people go, no, he'll be proud. You know, he's mad at me. That's how I feel. Nobody could change my mind because I know how he felt about people that cooperate. And that's why it took me over a year to make that call, because every time I picked up the phone, I saw his face and I couldn't do it. And I hang up the phone. I told my kids when I die, I gave them the deed. I said, when I die, bury me with my grandparents. Don't bury me with grandpa because I know he's mad at me. And people think I'm crazy, but that's my wish. I'm going to be buried with my grandparents, you know, in the Ruggiano grave, but with my grandparents, because my other grandparents are Guerreras. I'm not a Guerrero, even though I loved them and they loved me, but I'm going to go in the Ruggiano grave. That might sound crazy, but that's how traumatized, that's how cooperating affected me.
Do you wish you had not grown up in a mob family?
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Not at the time. I mean, there was a time I was thrilled. You
were enjoying it.
I was. And my friends loved my father. He, you know, Yankee Stadium, you know, he was, you know, he treated my friends. My friends loved my father, you know, taking us to the Copa, you know, hanging out with celebrities, you know, they loved it. But, you know, when I cooperated, there was, by coincidence, one day I was in a room with like 4 or 5 FBI agents, young guys, all Italian. I mean, I'm talking like in their 30s, but one was an agent for 10 years. He was an agent since he's in his 20s, you know, right out of college. And I'm sitting there, and I'm in this room, and they're all Italian agents, and they're sitting on the other side of the table, and I'm sitting here. And I looked at them, and I go, let me ask you a question. What did your fathers do for a living? So they look at me, they go, one father was a retired FBI agent, one father was an ICE agent, one's father was Secret Service, all law enforcement. Their fathers were all law enforcement in one branch or another. And I looked at them and I go, every morning when you wake up, thank God that your father's one a wise guy. Because if your father was a wise guy, maybe you'd be in my chair and I'd be in your chair. But that's the hand I was dealt. You know, they say God chooses our parents, right? God chooses who you know, if you're religious and you believe in Christ or whatever, God chooses our parents. You know, sometimes I look at the cross and I go, why did you choose them? You know what I mean? You couldn't have chose a butcher or a barber. You had to choose him. You know, like, what's the plan? You know, what's the plan? Maybe this is the plan. Maybe this was the plan all along. Maybe the plan was that I had to go through all that shit to become a counselor, and now to start doing stuff like this, to get a story out there, to tell these people, these kids out there, listen, don't do it. It's nice in the beginning, and it's instant gratification, but at the end of the day, you know, I spent 14 years in prison. I have 2 failed marriages. I missed my kids. My son, I was in jail almost my son's whole life. My daughter, I went to jail when she was 3. I came out when she was 11 the last time. My son was 13. I came out when he was 21. I gave up everything for the mob, for that life. I gave up everything. I committed a murder with my own father. I mean, it's, you know, when I think of it, like, what the fuck did we do?
What would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in this journey of yours?
The most important lesson is that nothing is going to make me happy but me. Does that make sense? Nothing's going to make me happy but me and humility. You have to be humble in this life. You know, you have ego is easing God out. That's what that's my theory. I ran on ego. I ran on self-centeredness. I was narcissistic self. It was all about me. Everything revolved, the whole world revolved around me and my needs, and I had no concern for you, for her. My first wife, I had no, I loved don't get me wrong, I loved my children. I loved my father. I loved my mother. I loved my brother. Did I love my sister? I killed her husband. You know what I mean? But I loved her, but it's insane. I think being humble, I had to go through a lot to get humble, to be, you have some humility, I guess. I don't know.
All right. Anthony, thank you so much for sharing your story.
It's a pleasure. I finally got to meet you and do your show. I've been waiting a long time for this.
We've been talking about this for years.
Yes.